Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And before we get started with our guest who's joining us, Adrian and I would like to first acknowledge that we are meeting virtually with our guest on the Coast Salish territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Lillooet First Nations, and that we're grateful to be here together in the ways in which we can join with one another. So at this point, we'd like to welcome Deb Fail. Deb is one of our early childhood educators at our campus children's center, and Deb comes with us with a wealth of experience that she's sharing with us today, working with young children and families and colleagues. Deb's experience is broad in the work she's done here at the university, but also prior to that, the work in another community program and her studies with her degree here at the university and her early childhood care and education. So it's a great pleasure, Deb, to have you join us, and thank you for taking time to be here.
Thanks, Tia. It's really awesome to be here in this way. The fact that we get to connect this way, it's just been profound, and I think I'll probably talk about this. The fact that we've been able to connect this way within our communities has just been really valuable. Yeah, definitely. But it's a pleasure to be here to see you guys.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Adrian.
So Deb, we've sketched out a few questions, but really we're just interested in gaining your perspective from practice. So one of the first questions we'd like to pose to you is, could you speak a little bit about your image of the family and how do you situate families?
Yeah, I think right away, I think that's one of the key things is that families are diverse. And so when you welcome a family, you're not just welcoming one particular person or type of person. There's the cultural diversity, there's everything from socioeconomic. One of the things I think about when we talk about situating as family, I feel this is me perhaps as a parent and an experience within in the care, but when people bring you their child and their infant specifically, they're bringing, I always call it their little basket of gold. Everything that they have, they're putting in a basket and they're trusting you to take this, their worth, everything that they have and keep it safe. And I think that that's a really key thing when we welcome families. And, when you think about families, they're so diverse. So when we get a parent, say a young mom who comes in, who may have often, depending, I don't want to stereotype or anything, but sometimes you might have someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of security as they bring their infant to you and their confidence level, and they might be a young student. Or you might have someone who is the exact opposite, an older mom who feels like they have their stuff together and this is what they want you to provide, and here's how they're outlaying or outlining how they expect this relationship to be. And it's not that they're not in over the top way in any way, but just everyone comes with their preconceived ideas about what's going to happen with their child and also what our relationship is. And I think that that's really key right away when they come in. And we come at the center, at the Children's Center, we're very much welcoming families. And when I say welcome, I really mean we welcome them in who they are, in their culture, family culture, but also within that, their family home culture, within their work culture, within their student culture, within their concerns, their worries, because no one comes to, some people come and they're like, oh, thank goodness we have care and we're just going to trust blindly, and which is not wrong either, but I don't mean to suggest that it's wrong, but we have to build that sense of the community that what we have, and we're introducing a sense of how our center operates, which may be different from something that maybe they have an older child that they experience something different, or perhaps that family, their child has only been cared for by a grandparent or a nanny situation. and then they come to us. So I think it looks really different depending on the parent, the family, their background. Yeah, I think I'm trying to think specifics here of because I can give you examples too. Going in like this recently, we had a parent who she came and she didn't know what to expect, and it was almost like she was apologetic for things. And I didn't. It's our job to welcome this family, but also to make them feel safe. And then we're going to be building a community, which I think we'll be asking you. Do you want me to talk about that right away into relationships, because that's what it's all about?
I think so, Deb, because what you've just spoken of also um, then begs this question of the process of developing this trust within that relationship. So how do you, in all of the various and multiple ways that you acknowledge families for who they are, and coming into this program, how do you then begin to work through this commitment to relationship and trust?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first off, you both know this in me, but I think that relationship is everything. Everything we do stems from a place of relationship and in our relationship. And it is because we're caring for an infant, but we're doing way more than that. And it all comes down to trust. And you can't just say, "Oh, it's okay, we got you. You can trust us," because they don't know that, and we don't know that we can actually have that relationship because we don't really know that child. So really, it's a process of building trust, and it doesn't happen over time. Relationships are your book in chapter 1. Relationships are complicated in the textbook that you use, and they really are, and they're complicated, and you have to build, and it's a time. So how we do that is how about shall I just talk about the process of what happens when we do gradual entry? Okay. So first off, children or the family, sorry, have a relationship with our Sarah, and they get accepted into the center. They might look into our philosophy, which, to tell you the truth, for the most part, my experience is they don't really understand our philosophy. They don't really know. I think what they know is that they're grateful that they have a spot.
Mm-hmm.
They've heard in the community that, oh, wow, CAP is great. I don't mean CAP is great. I just mean that they have heard that, oh, it's okay. We're going to be okay here. And because it's hard to get childcare.
Mm-hmm.
And then they come into the center. So they're enrolled. And then they come in, and we really try and sit with people, with families, new families, and the child. So it's about the child, but there's this massive amount of time and importance that's placed upon the relationship with the parents. Because when it comes to the child, we get to know the child, we watch, we observe as a group, very casual, very welcoming, open, on the floor with everyone. And we tend to see who the child goes to, and we respect that. So it could be they go to one educator, and we sort of right away we observe that. We don't tell the parent we're observing this, but so then the next time we might even schedule that shift around that child coming in, because we notice that child was naturally gravitated towards that educator. But when it comes to the parents, we go through everything. Like, to them, they're often most concerned about the day-to-day, the needs of their child, their sleep. And sleep is always the most important, always. And maybe the feeding, the diapering, all those kinds of things, where they're at mobility-wise. So those are the kind of concerns that often parents bring up, and we talk a lot again about sleep. And so we do all those things. But then through these discussions, it's really about who we are as a center, that we try and really emphasize, because parents, and this goes back to that first question about the diversity, everyone has their own idea of the image of a child as well as an educator. And specifically, I find that in infant educators, there's this perception of, the mothering, caring, gentle caregiver who walks around and cuddles, and we do all those great things. But we are more than that. And we try and, in this initial greeting and time spent with families, that's where we really spent a lot of time. And we also sometimes we talk about this, we actually use these words too, our vocabulary is around image of a child, but we, if a child is at home and parents have specific image of a child as one to be always kept safe, there is a certain life world no matter what that happens in a group care setting. And I don't beat around the bush. None of us beat around the bush with that. It is different. It is not at home under the safety of a parent's eye or a nanny. We are safe, of course, but, and this is that trust part, is that we have to show them that this is what happens. These are the really strong realities in group care. With the we view children as competent, and we view infants as competent, and they're capable. They might not be, but it's of course always appropriate to the age and the group that we have specifically in that group. And we tell people that too, that like if they're often, it's funny where it's almost apologetic that their child doesn't walk yet, and it's like, it's okay, they're an infant. But so it's like we would explain the infant room that we do have specific. It's very specific the way we am I trying to say, not orchestrate, but the way we curate our space within the physical challenges in a room, but they're not going to be so over the top that a child who's crawling can't meet that. But we also have to acknowledge a child who is very mobile. And we also have to build that trust again with the parents. Like they can see it, like even as a child is crawling around and we're in that space, we will be going near them to make sure that they can't fall. We do that naturally. So I think that there's a lot to be said about the trust, because again, that image may be different than our image of their child and their capabilities and their competencies. So I think that that is a big one. So going back to just the gradual entry, that's, we really emphasize as much time as we can for them to, we welcome them to come into our space and spend time with us, because I think the more they feel the culture in our room, the more they feel hopefully better, and they usually do. But it's through this constant, it's a lot of work goes into that time actually, when I think about it, the relationships, because as we're doing that, it's the opportunity that we really have this attention of a parent to talk about things like, I don't want to keep saying our philosophy, but our culture and our center. And we talk about the fact that their children and the educators, that the children specifically co-create a culture with us. We feel that's very strong. I try and use, always bring in things like our pedagogical principles, but also that the families need to know that they're situated in there too, that they are also co-creating a culture and a history together. And I think that that's, I personally love it. I think it's one of the richest things that people can get, because we're also the foundation of our center. So as children come in and families come in, they're getting the tone for the whole center. So the other thing too is we talk about curriculum. Our curriculum is, I can't say that it's different than other curriculum, but it is a unique curriculum, an arts-based curriculum with materials that parents need to know that this really is truly how we live our lives, and that they need to expect that in terms of everything from how they dress their children to come to we always say this, like dress them appropriately for everything from outdoor space to working with clay or paint and the different materials that we use.
So Deb, it sounds then what you've spoken to and articulated then in this process of building relationships and trust is really a process of negotiation that is an ongoing dialogue. And it sounds, as you've described, a lot in various points of children's connections amongst themselves, with one another, with the environment, the way in that they are themselves becoming comfortable and settled and taking on new challenges, as well as those conversations that you have with families that are negotiating the complexities of relationships that we hold. And so then I think that it's important then for us to ask, how do you convey or take up these conversations with families then of the pedagogical values of the program, and what you hold within the Children's Center as being integral to valuing in the work that you do, but also that process of negotiating with families in those conversations. Can you speak a little bit about to that process, or how
Yeah.
you partake in that?
Yeah, it's great. So one of the, again, in that space, in that time when we have parents, we have a manifesto. Is this okay time to talk about our principles and manifesto?
Yes.
Yeah. So in our center, we have in each room a manifesto, and the manifesto is something that it's very specific, and it's fluid. Like if we need to change it, we change it, and it's something that we have on our wall. And each room has one specific to their room. And our manifesto speaks to a sense of hospitality, welcoming, but also our commitment to living with intentions and our and radical dialogue. It has more on it too, and we have it in our room. And I invite parents to read it. Anyone who comes into our room, as a guest, I always, invite them to read it. And I personally, and I know my fellow colleagues do too, we hold it true so that so Tia, you asked the question about how do we do it. There's always going to be the complexities. There's always tensions, always. And first off, I think we're pretty communicative. We're reflective in our practice, but we're also gracious, I think, with our families. And we're kind people. We care about them. But it's not just, so when I go back to the manifesto and the principles, we have these things that guide us. They're like our compass. And so if we find ourselves off track, we go into, we look at that as our compass. What really is what leads us. And so the key thing in our room is hospitality. And when I say hospitality, I don't mean hospitality in, like when I go to a restaurant, you pay for a hospitality and sometimes it's extremely great and you're paying possibly even more for it. And I'm just going to say this piece here, but I think that when it comes to hospitality here, people are paying, and my goodness, they're paying a lot of money for childcare. But that's not the point that I'm trying to make here. The hospitality that I'm talking about is the hospitality where I welcome you in everything you are, and I'm willing to change because I'm welcoming you into our space. And at the center, we really strive to be more than a service. And of course, we're a service. We're an amazing service, I think. And I love our work as in within that service. But we are more than that in terms of we're more than a commodity that is just paid for. We strive to build a community. And in that manifesto and in this relationship with parents, that's really ultimately what we're trying to do, is build this community where it's reciprocal, so that it becomes more than a service. And so I think that that's just a culture that we're trying to build. But again, we're in that introductory foundation for families in the center. So a lot goes into, I think, the time and the work that has to be put into relations. And I'm just going to say this one quote because I really like it, that the emphasis of the ethic of care is not on the subject, but in the relation between the subject and the other. And I think that that's really important here because it's really about our relation in between. So we're not just caring, it's reciprocal and it's respectful. And we spend a lot of energy and time, but not in a scripted way. I love in your chapter 2 of that book, it talked about that. And I really like that because you cannot script this. You can't script it. There's no way you can get something to say, okay, this is how I'm going to be with this family, because there's this diversity. And then also there's all the tensions that come up that are inevitable. And it's only, I think, you cannot get away from tensions. And I think that the best way and what we do, and I like to think we do it well, is that we embrace the tensions and we really lean into them within a sense of, rather than the knee-jerk reaction of, Adrienne, you said this once about knee-jerk reaction of awkwardness, where like, oh, like you kind of sometimes want to sweep things under the carpet, like it's okay when parents talk about it plain, oh yeah, I agree, I can understand what you're saying. And we can understand what they're saying, but that's not where we leave it. We have to lean into it more. And I'm going to use an example if I can, because this goes back from a gradual entry scenario of welcoming a new family. where we only met the father for one full day he spent with the daughter, and it's always the mother who brings in. And it was very clear that this child is well supported and perhaps insulated within her family, two sets of grandparents, really hands-on. And we went outside, and you could just tell it had been raining, and she was in a muddy buddy, and children were in muddy buddies. And children, of course, that we knew who could handle this and do this were going down a slide and woo, and just went crazy. And then one child was running who was just learning how to walk. But again, we knew this about this child, but their brain and activity was way ahead of their body abilities. And they tumbled down the hill. And I could tell by the father's face, he was horrified. I could just see that his whole confidence of leaving his daughter with us was just completely gone. And he didn't say anything, but I could read it. And then the next day when the mother came in, she said, do you mind if I see your outdoor space? And I said, no, come on up. And I laughed, and I said, the husband, I said, I could tell that he was uncomfortable, but unfortunately I was too busy to actually, because it was just during a transition and he was leaving. Like, I couldn't really talk to him and address it. Mm-hmm. So I brought it up, and I leaned into the tension, and really, because these are those moments that you have to seize, because if I just swept it under or just went away from the awkwardness, it wouldn't help. And so we did, and she was fine with it. And because I also called it out too, I named it. I said, yes, I could tell your husband was very uncomfortable. This is what happened in the scenario. And yeah, and again, we're in group care. I cannot say that this will not happen. And I'm glad, because what did happen later was this child fell on a carpeted area and she broke her tooth. And it was really, I wasn't there that day, but it was a difficult scenario because she broke her tooth. She was crying, and no one knew that she broke her tooth. And she went home, and she went, anyways, her mom took her to BC Children's, and none of us even knew any of this had happened other than she fell. That's all we knew. And it was on a carpeted area. It was just one of those things that it just happens. Stuff happens. And then when she came back, she was upset. She talked to Sarah, who's our the supervisor, our manager. And then she came in, and I was away. So when I came back, that was the first thing everyone said, look, this is what happened. And I'm like, oh dear. So when she came in, I went straight up to her and I said, look, I'm really sorry that this happened. I'm not sorry, I'm not accountable for it, but I'm just sorry that this happened. I can imagine how you feel. And she said, yeah. But she kind of was awkward in her own way, because she didn't also want to say, and I'm pretty choked that this happened, and how could you guys not notice it? But so I said, please, I really brought her into a discussion with it. And it was excellent, because she wanted to talk about it. And she said, I just don't know how you guys couldn't have seen that. And it's not that I don't trust you. I do trust you, but I'm pretty upset. My husband's super upset. And so we got to really unpack that entire situation. And it was good, because as it turned out, her whole tooth had to get removed because it was rotten. And that's heartbreaking. We were all really upset about this. Mm-hmm. But none of it could have been prevented. And it's not about someone's fault. So I would say it was about the opportunity, and not just the opportunity, but it was a situational thing of, we're a community. And within community, we're going to have tensions, we're going to have complications, and there's no way you can avoid these. And so I think, and as a result, that child is hilariously attached to us, and we are attached to her parents. Her parents totally get it. It was a really neat thing, and I think it's good for that child. It was good. It's a good scenario for all of us as a reminder as well, the importance that can happen when you put the time into a relationship and don't avoid things. You lean into the tension.
So it sounds like moving through what was sort of a tense situation or a struggle actually strengthened the relationship in the end.
Yeah.
And before you told that story, you mentioned the manifesto and the importance of radical dialogue. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about radical dialogue.
Yeah, I can. And you can add to or poke me, you guys, if you want to on this. I think that the discussion with that mother was radical dialogue. I think that I'll give you another example of something with radical dialogue is a mother, a parent, a family group who we have two of their children. Their first one loved us and just amazing. And we have this great relationship and we still do. But then the second came along and you know, she's tired. She's got two young children. She's working. And then, you know, one day out of the blue, she just said, you know, Deb, what, can you tell me your pedagogical intentions of paint and dip dip? Because I'm done. I'm done with it. I don't want to bathe my children every night. And I was like, oh, and I was really taken aback by it because this is a person who, in my perception in our relationship, she loved our program. She loved what we did. She valued it. And I know she does. But it really threw me off. And I thought, oh man. And it was a really tense discussion because she was going through a tense period, I guess you could say, in her life. And it made me really think, and I had to step back. And so I had to really think, and I can really be honest here. That manifesto was in my head because I was just like, oh, it was at the end of a day, a crazy time of year. I was just like, I don't want to talk about this. Like, this is not where I want to be right now. But I did. And so I was able to talk to her about our pedagogical intentions, specifically our why we use paint and the purpose of what we do in our center. And I was able, even though she disagreed with it in this moment, I was able to go out of this sense of not push our philosophy on her and not say, well, look, this is what you signed up for. Like, cause, you know, we could easily do that, but that's not the point of a relationship. And that's also not the point of radical dialogue. So it's going out of a comfort zone on both points. And I would say that, again, that's another circumstance where it's deepened our relationship, definitely. The other thing, too, I'm going to say about radical dialogue is, and relationships, is coworkers. As early childhood students, you all know, or if you don't know, you work closely with coworkers and you have to build that trust. Just as we're talking about trust with families, trust with your colleagues and your coworkers is possibly one of the most important things, I think, in our work. It's definitely important. So that radical dialogue also comes in there because it is really hard to lean into tensions with coworkers who you're working with day to day, and you have a different relationship with them than you do with families. And I will say that the only reason I think our program, our infant program, and I probably can say that with all the rooms in our center, is because we have such amazing relationships. Like, I care so deeply for my coworkers and my colleagues, but again, that's that trust. And I think that when families come in, that's actually another piece too, that they pick up on the energy and the trust within that as well. And so the radical dialogue that we have may not be, when we say radical dialogue too, I don't mean in a case of confrontational. There's, you know, we don't have to be confrontational, but we don't shy away from it. Because sometimes parents do come at us with, there are instances for sure where I can think of historically. I don't know if I really want to give we don't need to go into examples here, but just to say that we all have had lived experiences where parents can come at us confrontationally, and it's how we respond. But I think it's only through our manifestos, I think, that help us with that pedagogical response.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Deb, what I really appreciate you mentioning in your work is, and the example that you provided with the situation outside with the father, you spoke to the attunement that you had,
Yeah.
his body language, his gestures, and often we speak of the importance with our young children, the attunement that we have in our relationship with children, but you've also really spoken and provided us a reminder of the importance that when we are developing and investing in these relationships, that it also comes with an attunement to the adult, whether it's the parents, the families. You've also acknowledged as with your team, and that seems to be so prevalent in what you've acknowledged here, and also holds the trust So to enable for that family to come back the next day and engage in those conversations and take up the radical dialogue that is imperative to share perspectives and to understand more deeply. Without that trust and that investment in that relationship, it probably looked and could have been very different in the way that it unfolded. But it really honors the commitment to an ongoing relationship that you've spoken to, I think.
Yeah, I actually, I like that, Tia, because I never really thought about it. But I mean, I think about the parents, but I think about attunement to our children in our room all the time, continually. And I think I say that word so many times, the importance of attunement, but I never really thought about, articulated it, that it's also attunement to the adults, because it really is. And I think probably with any age group, it's not exempt. But yeah, the attunement to the adult is really important, because it's hard when parents, I talked about parents bringing in, their gold and everything, and the sense of bringing you their worth. But there's also the sense of being attuned also to the parent who is happy to drop their child off and say, see you later. I'm not crying here. Like because they're happy, and it's not a judgment to that parent. So I think there's both parents of the ones that are just devastated to have to leave their child, to the ones who are happy to be getting on their way without their child.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know. And I think too, this idea with our relationships with parents, and just that comment I made about confrontation, I think it comes down again to this sense of hospitality and the importance of building a community, because there is this idea that parents feel that they are paying for a service, and we are providing a service, but there's also this give and take continually, I think, in a relationship when it comes to childcare, where we have to go through those tensions and the circumstances and the histories. Like if a child starts in an infant room and stays in the program until they go to kindergarten, it's not going to be clear sailing the whole time. And you're going to have parents who, and we have had parents where they feel, I'm trying to want to be fair how I say this, but maybe a sense of entitlement because they have this relationship built. But then it's also our relationship, because we've also spent that time with them, to have that relationship, but and not to push back to the entitlement, but to stay true again to our pedagogical principles, who we are, and also in that sense of community, that deep sense of community. And one of the things that I haven't said yet, but one of the things that we think deeply is this question of how to live well together. And I think that is ultimately this, everything is like, we're under that umbrella. And so how to live well doesn't mean that we say, oh, sorry, no, I get, and follow everything what the parent wants. And it's also not saying, no, I'm sorry, we're doing it this way. It's always meeting. It goes back again to that, the importance of that relationship and that time, and that ethic of care goes reciprocal in both ways. Yeah, definitely. And we really notice it right now during this time of COVID and not being with our children and families, and the relationship and in the relationship of correspondence that we've had between as well.
So it sounds then that your team works with vulnerability of being in relationships, and as our text acknowledges that that there are situations in which, as educators, we come into this work with a very particular image of our role, or the particular image of the child, or a particular image of the family, and through perhaps this ongoing commitment to radical dialogue that you take up as educators, and the commitments that you've really perhaps engaged in the conversation of, to what is this work that we're doing? What does it mean to us to be in relationship with others, children, families, and one another in your program? That you have committed yourself to being vulnerable in relationships, and in that moment, that place of vulnerability is perhaps where we are able to move, maybe move away from isn't the right word, but to be able to recognize when those assumptions of who this parent is, are blocking the relationship that we could otherwise have. And so I appreciate that, how you've spoken to this, that it reminds us of that relationships are complex, and in order to really be authentic in the relationship, as you've spoken to also with that, as you acknowledged, hospitable, it means coming into a place of vulnerability, arriving there with the willingness to greeting the unknown, and then developing trust and relationship from that place.
Yeah, I love that, Tia, because I think it really is about greeting the unknown. And one of the things as well that I marked in the chapter 2 was professional sites of struggle. And I think that if we embrace that sense of, yes, it is not supposed to be everyone's, all peaceful and we're in this bed of flowers. It's not that way. But it doesn't mean that it's nasty either. We're also not in the trenches. It's not, but it's, I really like that sense of professional sites of struggle, because I think that if we see it that way, and also if we embrace it that way, I think that it's helpful. I think one of the things too, I was thinking back to the role of the image of the educator as in that chapter where it says, we're more than about health and hygiene and all those things, and then there's versus the educator. And I think that for me, I really like the idea of just seeing both for what they are, and that care is curriculum as care, and that we really meet the two between of our goal to be about pedagogical responses, so that we have a sense of community, and a deeply rooted sense of community, and that we just have to go beyond this just care or just education, and that it's both. Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit more about the connection between care and curriculum, and perhaps even the danger of separating care from curriculum?
Adrienne, I was just going to say, why don't you speak about it? You're so amazing at it. I think that I think that actually goes right into that image of the roles of the educator. So if you're only the caring person who's just taking care of the baby and making sure they're clean and all this one, then you lose sight of the professionalism that we have within our of who we are, and because we are more than that. And and it's the same thing. You can't be this automat with a script of, no, this is the educator I am, we're going to do things this way. And like, one never can, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Adrienne, because you're great at saying this, but one never outweighs the other. And so how I see in our centers, care as curriculum and curriculum as care, as caring for a child is a curriculum, especially in an infant room. Diapering becomes an amazing, intimate, beautiful act of with a child of reciprocity, really, because I'm taking care of them, but they're also giving back too. They're part of their experience. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing when we actually do our, say, literally curriculum, like in terms of with materials, for instance. You might be doing something, I might be drawing or doing paper or painting and having clay while another child is next to them, sitting, reading a story, having a bottle, or doing both at the same time. Like, they really, I don't think just one weighs more than the other. And I think sometimes, though, from stuff that I hear professionally, I've been at, I remember once being at a big forum meeting, and there was this idea about, what's the right term for an early childhood educator? Can they be an educator, or are they a child?
Caregiver.
Thank you, caregiver. And I remember just kind of scratching my head thinking, surely we can think about, but I do think it's important. Like, it's not that I'm not saying it's important, because I can tell you, I can't wait to go back and being a caregiver again. But it's more than that. It's both. And it's always especially with infants, there's this idea often that they're not that they're just infants who need care, and they're actually in their own bodies, in my opinion, that they're very much who they are, where they're at, whether they crawl, walk, wherever. I like to see them who they are, where they are, and that they can have pedagogical experiences too. You don't have to be a 3 or a 4-year old to have a pedagogical experience. I think that that again is an underestimate, and perhaps even in the field where infant toddler stuff sort of gets pushed aside because it's not quite seen as a sense of what you do with curriculum with children. And I think that infants and toddlers, but they're absolutely capable of having, and they do have pedagogical experiences.
And often when I'm in the Juniper room and it's mealtime, it's snack time, the children are eating lunch, I always feel so impacted by what's happening during that time. And I think it's such a perfect example of the act of feeding an infant. It can be a pedagogical experience. It's not simply a care routine. It's much more than that. And I think when you create a pedagogical value around something like relationships, then it becomes evident in everything you do. It becomes evident in how you arrange food on the table, how you gather around the table with children. And that's always something that's very evident to me. And I certainly don't see care and curriculum as being competitive forces in Juniper. I see the two as being very entwined.
Yeah, and yes, and when you talk about food, I think that in literally every single act we do, it's combined. Now that you say it like that, it's absolutely like I think that time, how we view time, is a really important thing too, because we're not rushing through anything. Therefore, we really can have these experiences that are more than just caring, for sure, because we're not feeding in order to nap, and we're not napping in order to have snack and then for a parent to pick up. It's not like this procession throughout a day. And I think that when we slow things down, we can, and they're beautiful acts of, and I'll also say mutuality too, where we're really very much engaged in being together in that room, together in that I care, I think, is co-constructed, and it's through respectful and reciprocal interactions continually throughout the day. So whether it's what you said, feeding, I think diapering is another one, reading a story, cuddling before nap time. You can tell I've been away from the babies because now I'm getting
Yeah.
really, it's so, but it is really, I miss those times. And I think that, and we put a great deal of energy, how we, again, I used the word curate earlier, but how we orchestrate, or that's the wrong word, but how we have snack together, how we can be together to create those experiences, because otherwise it's mayhem, and sometimes it is mayhem, but it's fun mayhem, it's organized mayhem, and it's we think of ways how to be, and again, each child is so unique within how they need their specific care of whether it's feeding or whatever, napping, all those things. And again, the family is very much part of that too, of everything, from the food to how they nap, everything. So yeah.
There's certainly a feeling in Juniper to come into your room, as Adrienne mentioned, during a time in which children are gathered at the table together with educators, having a meal together. There's a strong sense of living life together rather than it being separate as an educator dictating or controlling what's going to happen next. And I feel the agency of those infants and the influence that they have also upon the relationships between one another and with the educators, so that it really is a coming into a room in which their life is happening and it's unfolding together. in a way that is really, it's quite strong and very moving and beautiful. And you can feel the value that lives in that space.
That's
Respectful relationships of one another and
yeah, and I think that goes back to this idea that children, we really do co-construct our culture in our rooms, and so that because it's not adult down to the child, like this is how we're doing things. It's not that at all, because we do listen to children. We absolutely listen to children. So if they are saying, clearly no, we meet it where the child's at, and to anything, not just saying no to, I'm thinking about food specifically, but and or if they want to do it themselves, especially with meals. And Adrian, what you were just speaking to too, the interdependency is what we really like to see, so that they, as you said, agency, they do bring their own agency, and it's how we grow with them and create our own culture, and everyone brings their own, and we get to know these amazing human beings, and they influence us. And again, I think it comes back to that sense of hospitality, of being willing to change, because now I have been impacted by your presence. And I think that that's it. So it's not just about what I'm doing for this child, it's also what they're giving back to their space, the people in their room and their community.
I like the idea of growing with the child, and that really draws my attention to responsive caregiving, and just the image of the child, specifically the infant, that's constantly growing and changing and in flux in their body and their ways of being in the world. And I think that's a very complex process of being so responsive to this tiny human that's constantly in flux. Can you speak a little bit about that? What is necessary? What is necessary for you to practice in that way?
Yeah, well, to listen, to really watch and observe. I think that because it's what you said, they're always in this influx. So if a child is learning something, their movement is rapid and their growth is rapid, and sometimes it's not, and then all of a sudden it is, and that's just one child. So when you have a room full of infants, and you have to be, you're really aware, but you're also really listening to parents and saying, hey, this is what happened over the weekend. They might do this, and anything from biting to like learning how to walk, but all those things, like, just so you know, keep your heads up, like this is what's happening. Because when we watch, we change the room around, we be mindful of things like where I don't want to rescue a child if they're about to walk, but I want to make sure that I can give them the right space that they need for safety reasons. And also the opposite, where a child is really running and all of a sudden they have an ability that they don't actually know that they have this ability yet. So there could be a safety hazard in that too. So there's and it's, feeding habits. I was getting some fantastic, two different parents sent me emails and updates on their children who, with videos of like, they can eat their soup now with a spoon, and they're determined, and you're not allowed to touch them while they do it, which is funny because they all wanted to eat the soup but refused the spoon, so they would just eat with their mouth and or with their hand. And 2 months ago, and so I think that that's a really interesting space to be in terms of really observing and watching. And this influx too that they're in can make them sometimes really frustrated. So again, it's kind of understanding that too. So, not to just think, oh, they're cranky or whatever, or they're having a bad day. It's like, no, they're really choked because they're having a hard time. Like, a little bit of compassion here. So a little bit of compassion for everyone wherever they're at. So, yeah. But it's actually really neat because you've got all these moving parts as well, because there's multiple children, and it's pretty neat. It keeps us on our toes, but it's also we can never ever be complacent in any relationship. That you're always changing and moving with it. So yeah, there's no such thing. Yeah, I think complacency is has no space.
So Deb, with that, uh, with the attunement and the commitment to relationship that you spoke of, what could you share with us what is with you at this particular time in your heart, and what you're thinking about in terms of where we are right now, knowing that you are not with the children that you and families that you care so deeply work. What's also then become important for you as you've reflected and thought about your work, but also the re-envisioning of what and how it might be when you come together one another.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because this all happened fast. And I think that when we were okay, and all of a sudden we found ourselves at home and separate, we didn't know whether it was just like a week or two. We had no idea at the time. But right away in the infant room, we realized where other rooms were trying to do different things with connections, talking about different connections, like should they do story time for families or for children? I mean, and we felt right away in our room we needed to connect with the families because really that's who we're connecting with. That's who's going to be reading in them. So I feel like more than ever, the importance of relationship is really strong here, and it's really we've received the most beautiful emails and pictures and stories, and also that these families are also really busy, and quite frankly their worlds have been turned up, upside down in many ways because they have this young child and they'd be working full time now with this young child from home. So I think for me, the attunement goes back again to these relationships, and it's hard, Tia, because we still don't know really what's going to happen, and also who's going to come back under the new, these new situations. So we really don't know what will unfold. But I do know that our relationships that we've invested, so I don't want to, that's the wrong word to say invested, but we've created, that we've really been, and that also, again, it's not scripted. These are really true relationships. It's not just because it's my job. It's the joy aspect of my job, actually, because of the relationships. And I think that how we carry on in the future will be interesting, because we worry about certain families, not just like there's some families that might be more vulnerable than others, but we're also aware, because again, we have this understanding of people of different relationships, that some people are more may not be doing as well, even mentally. This could be a real struggle for a lot of people and children. Mm-hmm. So I think that in terms of attunement, it's really important that we re-envision what will happen in the future, because now when we go back, everyone's going to be doing gradual entry together, whether it's new children or the ones that are returning. Yeah, I think that that's really it's really difficult. So I would say, in my mind and my heart, it's the families, but I also feel like we've grown we've grown as a team in terms of trying to deepen our understandings within how we can reach out to families differently than we have. And also it's placed more of a highlight on what we really truly value. And I think that this is it. This is the sense of who we are as a community, and you're only a community if it's what you've built, what you've put into it. And I think that that's really massive, because again, that's the point. At the end of the day, how to live well together, it's to build a community, but through going through complexities, and this is a complexity for sure. This is a massive uncertainty that we don't know. So yeah.
Well, Deb, thank you so much for sharing these really rich, nuanced perspectives from practice. I think this is really a valuable piece that we're bringing to the students.
Well, you're welcome, Adrienne and Tia. It's been a pleasure, but I mean, I'm passionate about it. I have a bazillion stories that give you so many little other things, that there's all these layers, and it really is about layering continually with Yeah, the building of it, but it's rich. I love our work. I love working with infants and toddlers and the families. It's such a beautiful, amazing world we're in our lived life. Yeah, it's good. Our daily experiences.
Well, thank you, Deb.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, ladies. Have a good day.
All
Okay.
right.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
She actually left.